Hello everyone, I'm Mike Reagan, Senior Vice President, Business Alliance for RE/MAX LLC. On behalf of more than 100,000 RE/MAX associates in over 100 countries and territories around the globe, RE/MAX is proud to support the mission of AREAA to promote home ownership within the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. The following presentation by John Yen Wong, founding chairman of AREAA, will provide you an in-depth look at the Asian real estate market in the U.S. and illustrate how you can maximize opportunities to serve this growing segment of the population. Please welcome Mr. John Yen Wong.
Thank you, Mike.
Glad to have you.
On behalf of the 19.5 million potential real estate clients in the United States, welcome to AREAA's presentation on effectively reaching the Asian Pacific American Islander population. Now, let me begin by asking, well, a show of raise of hands, who in this audience has worked in a transaction that had an Asian American Pacific Islander consumer? So most of them. How many of those who have worked with this segment was working on the listing side? Okay, one. And how many were on the buy side? Okay, that's fantastic. Because it's clear that I'm with an audience that understands sort of the opportunities here. So here's what we're going to do the rest of today. We're going to go over really a way to build this into your business. And we have three primary goals that we're going to accomplish in the next 60 minutes. One is we're going to help you develop some skills that will be very helpful to become more effective in building this part of the population into your real estate business. We're going to probably go over some cultural nuances, some of the things that would be helpful to know when you're interacting with a client that's from a different country, an Asian country of origin. And really the last skill set is how to meld that skill into your being a realtor so that you protect your clients, you protect your company, and you do a lot of business. You complete this workshop, I want to ask you a couple of questions again. When you appreciate diversity, appreciate working with multicultural clients, remember that you can't limit it to just your real estate business. As you begin to understand your clients and their different, the nuances of what they think, how they work, and how they transact a real estate deal, it's important to know that how they function personally as well. Because one of the things you find within the Asian segment is that it's not just a deal. They won't just see you as their real estate agent. They will want to become your friend. And so the separation of what I do in the day-to-day job versus how you live the rest of your life becomes melded together to be successful in working in this market. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some stats. We're going to look over and see from a study that the AREAA organization did called A State of Asian America, which was completed in 2015. We're updating it right now to really sense what is the potential in this market for you. We're going to really, the decision-making process. How do you get a client with an Asian background to actually sign on that contract? That's the most important thing in our lives, and it's one of the most important things in your client's life. But it's not as simple as to say, here's the contract, just sign. There needs to be a process that one goes through. And so it's a process that some of you apparently have gone through. That's very exciting to hear. And we're going to enhance that a little bit, the balance of the hour. So let me again talk about this AAPI segment, Asian American Pacific Islander. Many of us who have grown up in this country and have been around for a little while remember that the identity of this potential market has shifted. At one time, most Americans spoke of individuals from Asian countries as Orientals, as opposed to Occidentals, which was the West. Over time, that definition, that identification has taken on some negative connotations. The reasons are varied, but one of the things that it's important is to remain somewhat current in how people like to be identified. And so currently, AREAA works with the Asian American Pacific Islander group, which means that you're not only in the core countries of Asia, but you're in South Asia and you're in the Pacific Islands as well. The data, as I mentioned, comes from the state of Asia and America. And let's look for some of the details regarding this. Now, Asia is about over 40 countries. So everybody right now in today's market is focused on one country in particular, China. But the reality, the opportunities extend way beyond this one country. And we're going to go over some of the possibilities there. There's a factor that's very important about this segment, and in particular, the AAPI population in the United States. 79% of the individuals in this country who are over the age of 18 were born outside of the United States, which means to successfully work with this particular clientele, it may be helpful to have some language skills, because it's likely this person who was born outside of the United States but is here now and looking for real estate will speak a language in addition to English. Sometimes not English as the language they're most comfortable with. So the skill sets to develop, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation, but how do you develop a strategy to work with that? Here's another stat. 79% of those under 18 were born in the United States. So language issues are not as critical, but you think about it, now you're working with a millennial population that was born in this country, who are still interacting with family members who were born outside. So really the role that you play as a real estate professional is to understand some of the nuances of both those groups of folks. Currently, the population in the United States is estimated at 19.5 million people, and the population, it grew 45% between 2000 and 2010, which means that if you look at the overall numbers of the individuals in this market segment, it is not huge, but it is fast growing. And that's where the opportunity lies, because when there's fast growing and transition, that's where the opportunities to develop business come from. And really the segment is not yet the largest. It may never become the largest segment of the population of the United States, but it is the fastest growing. And then by 2050, they're expected the population to increase by 134% to over 36 million people. So it is very, very worthwhile to consider developing the skills to work with this market. Every state except for Hawaii has experienced at least 30% growth in this population between 2000 and 2010. Why not Hawaii? Because Hawaii, the Asian segment, is already the majority. And when AREAA first started, this is a little anecdotal story, back in 2003, my co-founder, Alan Okamoto, and I went to Hawaii and said that we're a new organization. We're here to help you learn how to work with the Asian segment. And they kind of, that's all we work with. And so I think what has happened over time is now we have a very strong, vibrant Hawaii chapter. And part of it is in addition to working with domestic Asian Pacific American clients, AREAA has become very successful in working with those from other parts of the world, in particular Asia, and it kind of melds together. This is one of the graphs that's in the study I've talked about, and it really kind of breaks down the population of the different countries of origins for the AAPI population in the United States. Kind of probably we had an intuitive feeling, 22% of the Asian American Pacific Islander population in the United States are from China, 19% from the Philippines, 16% from India, and we can go through those numbers. But if you look at this slide, the thing that I find most important is 18% are from the balance of the countries. And the reality is the focus now is on the country of China, but really as you look in your own market spaces, you may have other populations of folks from different parts of Asia that is very, very potentially profitable to develop relationships with. So whether it's a Bangladeshi client, whether it's Burmese, Laotian, I strongly recommend taking sort of scope of the opportunities that are in these countries also. So you took at the populations by demographics. The top 10 states for the API population, first one is pretty obvious, California, over close to 6 million in the population, about 15% of the population. And you go down that list, a lot of these are the states that one kind of would imagine. Although, if you look at number 9, Virginia, why is that happening? If you look at all of a sudden, you see, number 4, New Jersey, why is that happening? And the reality is some of the drivers for where folks of AAPI heritage like to live are where there are good schools. Because education, we will find, is a very, very important driver for individuals from this particular market segment. Some of the fastest growing populations, now we looked here and saw that the states with the largest population, but if you look at the fastest growing, and this sort of confirms the statement I just made, South Dakota has grown by 33%, North Carolina by 25%, New Mexico by 23%. So the thought that I want to put into the room is that everybody assumes, oh, if you want to work with an Asian segment client, you've got to be from San Francisco, you've got to be from New York, you got to be from LA. The reality is the growth of the population and the opportunities in the United States is expanding much more broadly than just these core entry cities. And again, we see the same by population. Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco are the top 3, but there are others that are growing very, very quickly. An interesting component of this population is education. 21.2%, this is from the US Census, who are identified as part of the AAPI community have a bachelor's degree or higher. This is significantly in excess of the 17% that is true for Americans as a whole, which means you have a population that is education-focused, degree-oriented, and may understand the home buying process more easily from real estate agents who spend the time to explain it to them. Now, one of the things that's important to recognize is that when you're working with this segment, it is not all PhDs that you'll be working with, because there's a significant segment of the AAPI population that is masked by the fact that they are in the bottom quartile of those of education. So I think the most important thing to take away from the discussion today is you don't make stereotypic assumptions that every Asian is wealthy, every Asian is smart, and every Asian doesn't speak English. So there's a broad, there's some nuances that it's helpful for us to understand for the population as a whole. Median income, an important component for the business we're in. The average income for the AAPI segment is $66,000 as compared to $49,800 for the US population as a whole. And if you look at the household income with the $72,472 median income, that's significantly higher than the average. So you think about the market you're identifying. Here's a segment that has made the effort to get advanced college degrees. They have higher median income. Should they be a market that you can build into your business? This is an interesting detail because up until July of this year, the US Census, which puts out a quarterly housing report, had listed non-Hispanic whites, African American, but there was no separator for Asian American Pacific Islanders. And AREAA as an organization worked with Census so that for the first time, the Asian American Pacific Islander segment is identified, and we now look at the housing data on a quarterly basis with this segment. Why is this important? Number one, it was called the No Other program. It was a strong desire not to be just listed as other. But more importantly, this begins having real data that will help us understand how to serve the market better and to help more folks from this segment into homeownership. Homeownership rates, as I mentioned, the particular segment, higher median income, better education, and yet the homeownership rate is still about maybe 8 to 10% below Americans as a whole. That's where the opportunity is. When we also looked at the mortgage opportunity for this segment, over the last 5 years, Asian Americans have produced 2 million loans. So for a population that is relatively modest over the overall population, the desire to buy homes indicated by the number of loans that were obtained is very, very high. It was really an opportunity with $600 billion in mortgage origination, and also with an average loan balance of $300,000, the highest of any community. Part of that is focused historically. The population has been in high-cost areas, like San Francisco or Los Angeles or Manhattan, but that is melding out and spreading out throughout the country. So I look at that number, which is a great opportunity, but to be balanced more as there are more buyers in other parts of the United States. Purchasing power, over $1 trillion by 2018. It really is, just as this segment in the United States would be the 19th largest economy in the world, be larger than Saudi Arabia and Switzerland. So the opportunity there is huge. The economic impact. This is an important factor to consider in that there was over 1 million Americans, or 3 million Americans are employed by businesses owned by Asian American Pacific Islanders. 1 out of 10 individuals in this country who identify themselves as Asian American Pacific Islander own their own business. And so the entrepreneurial spirit becomes very, very important. And this is where a realtor becomes more important than ever, because self-employed individuals are having currently a little more of a challenge getting loan approvals for properties. And so the skill set that you could bring in helping a self-employed individual becomes very, very an important tool that you can have to support this clientele. So we've talked about the opportunity. We sense that, yes, it makes sense to include this market segment as you build out your business plan. So let's now take a look at how one actually can get involved in this segment. And this section is kind of titled Culture Matters, in the sense that, yes, it's important to understand the background and the belief patterns that they've developed either by being born in another country and coming to the United States, or if you're the 79% of folks 18 or under who were born in this country, you're still heavily influenced by your family and their belief systems. Some of the skill sets that would be helpful for a real estate professional: language skills. Now, we saw earlier that a significant percent of the population are foreign born. So for some of them, English has been an additional language they've learned, but they may also be more comfortable in a language other than English. So the question then, how important it is for a realtor to develop multiple language skill sets. There was a time when I said that it was not as critical because you can always find a partner to work with who has those language skills. But I've come around to thinking that the reality, the market segment is so large, and the ability to learn another language has become easier, whether it's Rosetta Stone, community colleges, that it may be helpful that our industry, just like other corporate industries, are spending some time to develop an additional language skill. And then I'll flip the context of that. Some of you may have used a product called Google Translate. And while it was not a very good program 5 years ago, it has in fact become better and better as a translator in written form. And the reality is right now, more and more companies are using verbal, whether it's Siri or others, that at some point there may be the ability, at least on the business side, to have translations at your disposal via an app. So my comment was, at one time I said, no, you can find somebody to help you translate. Then I thought, well, it's probably better to learn some of the language yourself to communicate. And now at a certain point, we may reach a point where that becomes easier to do because you may have tools to support you. Global business styles. We have to get a sense of how business is transacted in the country of origin where this population is from. That how we do business in the United States may be quite different than how business is done in the country that they're originally from. Cultural nuances, we'll talk a little bit about that. That's, broadly speaking, feng shui is folks that people think about. We'll dive deeply into that to see how much that really matters and how much of it one should learn. There's a concept called high and low context cultures, and we'll discuss a little bit of that because it really differentiates how Americans transact business and have personal relationships from many folks from Asian countries. And the access to potential clients, where do you go to actually meet clientele? To understand how to do business, this is a book that came out in 2006 in the second edition. It is still, in my opinion, one of the best volumes available, almost encyclopedic, to help you understand stylistically and behaviorally how to transact business for global. The Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hand book was really focused on, had a global reach. It was really working with Asian countries, working with European countries. And more recently, there was one called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hand Asia, which is very focused on the Asian countries, which today's presentation is about. I strongly recommend, Terry Morrison has done a great job at really consolidating different behaviors. Everything from how to pass out a business card, you go up to somebody and slap on the back, hey man, how's it going? Or versus being more, a little more reserved. High context cultures. This was a concept that was put in a book back in 1996. And it really, high context cultures are cultures where you as an individual interact with everybody else around you, and it's like a network that's all connected. It's not a one-on-one relationship where I will have a relationship with you that is separate from my relationship with another person. But really all of us kind of network together. And this is kind of important because in this type of context, and many individuals whose country of origins was from Asia fit in this high context category, there's less verbal explicit communication. It's not coming in the room, so I'll tell you what, we're gonna go, you wanna buy a house? Here's what you gotta do. 1, you gotta do this, you gotta be pre-qualified. 2, you gotta look at a purchase contract, sign it. Then we'll negotiate and then you sign. This type of directive communication is not easily understood by a person who really wants to trust you, to get to know you before business actually transacted. There's more internalized understanding. What I mean is sort of there's a societal understanding of how things work as opposed to specific instructions about how something happens. And so there is a cultural understanding from the country they're from and the community they're from within that country of how things are done, and they relate to each other. Long-term relationships are very important. It's not just that, I tell you what, I'm ready to buy a house, let's have a relationship, deal closes, bye, I'm going on to somebody else. It really is when you start the process, you become a friend, you become supportive in almost all that they do in their lives are about, you become interested in what their children are doing, you become interested in what their community's doing from a social standpoint, and you have this long-term relationship. And there's also something, it's like an insider mentality. It's that if you're part of this group, you're a deep member that they want to do business with. If you're not in the group, you're almost, I wouldn't say ignored, but you're not as trusted. So it's important when you're trying to develop a business relationship in this environment that you spend the time to get to know the families and the community. And a lot of face-to-face communications. That a quick text and an email may not be as successful. This is in contrast to low context cultures, which is what we have in the United States, where we are really used to directive communications. We're very rules oriented. You go through steps that outside rules control what you do. And you have external knowledge. There are laws, there are regulations that govern how you interact with each other. And the relation is a much shorter duration. I know that in the real estate industry, a lot of our managers tell us, by the way, the easiest transactions are from clients who you've already had a transaction with. Keep contact with them. But it's not uncommon for many real estate agents to do a transaction, get focused on the next one, only to find out 5 years later that somebody they sold a house to sold it, but not with them. So when you're working with the Asian community, that concept of staying in contact is very, very important. And what we do in this country in a low context culture is that decisions need to be focused on what needs to be done. An example that I have found very helpful for me is the difference between a low context environment or a high context environment. A low context environment is you're going out to a fast food place to eat. You go there, you already kind of understand how the process works, you get in line on what you pick, you buy the food and you go. A high context experience would be going to a restaurant where you go and everybody knows your name, you relax, you sit down, when people share things and you talk to each other. So if you take that kind of concept on food and dining and transfer it to real estate, that'll help you kind of give a sense of the importance of developing an understanding of high context culture. Now, some of the cultural nuances that are important to clients from Asia. By show of hands, how many have heard the term feng shui? How many of you would say that you are feng shui experts? Okay, so we've got 3 experts. Again, you're going to have to save me if I make a mistake in how I describe feng shui. Almost everyone in the audience raised their hand when they say they've heard of the concept, and they know it's important. Feng shui is translated from the Chinese as the sort of the wind or air and water. And it relates to the flow of energy that's very important as a concept to to countries which were really an agrarian society. Because if you were primarily an agrarian society and farmed, really the flow of water, the flow of air, and really nature was very, very important to how you lived. And that, in fact, has played a role in the thinking of what is important when you're making a decision in your life. And that includes buying a house. So the free flow of energy, and some of you will hear that, gosh, you shouldn't have a stairway right in front of the front door because that blocks your energy. Or you shouldn't have an open door in a kitchen that goes right through from the front door to the back of the house because your energy will flow out of there. And conceptually, this concept of energy really can be just movement of air. That before there was air conditioning, that you didn't want design of your dwelling to have things that blocked you. You wanted things to be very smooth flowing. And this is the concept that really is the backbone of a lot of the theories in feng shui. Orientation is very, very important because many individuals from Asian countries like to be facing east. Because of where it was in the hemisphere, that's where you had the most light, the most wind. It's not that different really from how we like to say we like a hilltop location because it has the views. We don't like to be in valleys because it might get flooded. And really, the orientation component is an important part of how an Asian consumer makes his decision about what to buy. Numbers is also kind of an important component. And sometimes we wonder, well, why do they like 8 and not like 4? The reason is because those are homonyms. 8 is a homonym for wealth. 4 is a homonym for death. And so, wow, isn't that kind of arbitrary and doesn't make a whole lot of sense? And I kind of thought about it. In reality, I have rarely been to a hotel where there's a 13th floor. And when I was speaking with a feng shui expert maybe 2 decades ago from Asia for the first time, his comment in a room and training like this was, and for a person from this part of China, the best address you can have is 666. And there were those of the Catholic faith that say, maybe I don't want to live in a house with that address. And the comment really kind of pointed out that all of us have our belief systems. Why don't hotels have 13 floors? It's not so much necessarily that the owner of the hotel has that belief that it's bad luck, but if the consumer would be more reticent about staying on that floor and maybe paying less, that's a decision that's worthwhile in making. I think colors also is very important. Many of us in our country, in this country, would not necessarily wear a black colored outfit to a wedding. There are certain kind of characteristics, colors that are important to Western culture, American culture. And in countries from Asia, there are also historical. So white is not a color that is thought to be favorable, even though it's thought so in our country, because it is the color of often the clothing one wears to a funeral. And so those are the little nuances it's worthwhile to understand so that we don't inadvertently create some unnecessary blockage in the energy of the relationship between people. And the dates are very important. Within the Chinese and other Asian cultures' horoscope, there are certain days that are very auspicious. So one of the factors that comes into play, that could come into play when you're working with a client from an Asian background is that they want to close on a certain date. And it's really important that they close on a certain date. So that when we understand that this is important, when you're preparing the contract and interacting with the agent on the other side, we take that into account. Where else might we see in our country where dates might be important? Because a lot of agents that I've worked with says, this is silly, we just get an extension, what the heck? But the reality of a client who is executing a 1031 exchange, and if they were not to close on a certain date, there were tremendous tax consequences, it becomes very important. So it's important that you understand and really have the conversation with your client about how important any of these factors are. Now, the other thing that I will emphasize, because I have many agent friends who've gone to feng shui classes and says, man, I know this stuff. I know exactly what to do. And I'm going to apply it to every person whom I believe might be from an Asian background. Well, the recognition is these are rules to understand, to apply, so that if a situation comes up where it is apparently important, you have some context to put it in. But never ever should any real estate agent just make an assumption about their client in any behavior, because there are many, many times where they may not give a hoot about this. And if you make this assumption, you may actually distance the relationship because they feel that you are stereotyping them. So the most important thing to do regarding any of these cultural nuances is to have them in the background as a resource of understanding, but always interact and treat each one of your clients as an individual. You will also find that within a family, there may be differences in perspective. You will have the parents who are from a country in Asia that may have a sense of this more strongly than their child who was born here, who doesn't feel that this applies to them at all. But it may still be important because some of the down payment will be coming from the person who does care. And so the understanding of it is to be respectful of this nuance, because I've had situations where the client will say that, oh, I've asked, are there any structural components that are important to you, his orientation or any of that? And I asked it very generically rather than saying, do you live in feng shui? Because if you do that, it's so aggressive and you make an assumption. So you really just ask some subtle questions. What are some of the things that are important to you? Does it matter where it sits on the street? Does it matter where it sits in the city? Are hills and stuff important? And by having that type of probing conversation, really sort of open-ended questions, you begin to understand what's important to them. And I've more than once, and I work with a lot of millennial clients who were referrals from my children right now in San Francisco, but they're techies from down in Silicon Valley, where this stuff says it doesn't matter. But they are respectful of the fact that a lot of their down payment, hundreds of thousands of dollars, are coming from someone who does. And so oftentimes you write in the contract a contingency of a personal inspection by some other family members. And so what that does, it allows that reality to happen without having to explain to the other side, oh, by the way, we had our inspection and they've decided to move on to a different property, without clearly listing in the contract that this is not based on a physical inspection, is not based on an event or hazards inspection, but rather something that some agents may feel is not a relevant component in the decision. So what I've done in the past is just put in a contingency subject to a written approval of a physical inspection by family members. And in communities where there are many transactions that involve somebody where feng shui might be a role, that's become sort of just an understood part of the transaction. Now, some of the shared values that generally could be said of buyers and sellers from the Asian American Pacific Islander community, family-oriented. It is not uncommon for the children to actually listen to their parents in a discussion. And not just their parents, but maybe an auntie and maybe a brother or sister. So the interactions you have with a client really extends beyond just your direct relationship, who the buyer is. You're involved with their families. As I mentioned, it's a high context culture where everybody becomes engaged. There's some strong value toward education and fine arts. It's almost a mythology that, gosh, you have an Asian person applying to a university. on their extracurricular, they're probably a virtuoso pianist or a violinist or, or an artist of some sort. But I think the important thing to focus is that within the many families from this demographic, education is important, and a knowledge and a skill in culture and the arts is very, very important. So to the extent that you can speak to that you can acknowledge that the individual's child who is having a recital for violin, that you don't just blow, oh, that's cool, right, and move on, but do you pay attention and acknowledge that that's something that is very beneficial and pleasurable to know. Living arrangements, oftentimes when you have individuals from the AAPI segment buying, the willingness to have family members buy together and perhaps higher density in a house than what we might come accustomed to becomes real. Part of this will impact that when you're showing a property in an open house, it won't be one or two individuals, it might be 5 or 6 or 7 or more. And to kind of understand that is part of the process. I think the idea of having families live close together in communities. So one transaction may lead, in fact, to a second or third transaction for a sibling in a close by to where you are able to sell this first house. Non-confrontational nature. And this is, I think, a broad generalization that is not always accurate. I have been married for 33 years to a wonderful woman who is a top producing agent, and she is not afraid of confrontation when it's necessary. So you kind of make the assumption, but don't always assume that everybody will be meek and mild. Everybody's an individual and things change. Respecting elders is, I think, a really important component. And so if you have a client that you're showing a property to and they have their parents with them, pay attention to the needs and desires and the communications from the entire family. It is not uncommon that perhaps the parent or senior advisor, if you will be very vocal during the actual interaction. But I can assure you that when they are by themselves, there will be a lot of that interaction going on. So be respectful and keep your ears open for any clues that you can have of how the family is feeling. Value conscious. There's a sense that one doesn't want to overpay. Strong work ethic. Folks are willing to work 2 or 3 jobs, work long hours to develop the ability to basically purchase. And that's something that's very valuable. How that might impact is that a lot of the times when you're in the midst of the transaction, if the person has a couple of jobs, their ability of when they can go sign escrow documents, etc., needs to be taken into account. And again, I emphasize that these are guidelines, not laws or rules. Not every single one of your clients from this particular demographic will behave in this way, but it's nice to know that there is an overall context which might apply to your specific interactions. When to ask for the order. This is something that in a low context culture like the United States, it is very directed. You meet a client, you show them a property. I've shown you 3. Which one do you like? Here's the contract, sign, let's go. And so is that the methodology that is appropriate when you're working in a real estate transaction with this client, or do you go more slowly? Okay? Generally speaking, the relationship needs to be built. The decision process might be slower, but taken in the real world, in the San Francisco market where I spend most of my real estate time, when you have a very hot market, and a person spends some time making a decision and loses out on 3 or 4 opportunities, then the shift might happen. In other words, general context, your specific market conditions will impact that. Your success will be your ability to help educate what the current situation is and to be able to appropriately transition the behavior patterns, the business behavior patterns to fit more your market. Because if somebody has lost out on a transaction 5 or 6 times, and by the way, the next one I write is now $100,000 more, that will play a role because value consciousness is important. Some of the barriers for this segment, and AREAA was formed in 2003 to help focus on this, is the need to feel financially stable and ready before they consider buying a house. When AREAA was formed, it was not uncommon for an Asian American Pacific Islander buyer to feel they didn't need 20%, needed 50% as a down payment before they would feel comfortable in initiating a purchase. And when AREAA was formed in 2003, there was a lot of lost opportunity because market was accelerating so quickly that by waiting just a year or two to save more money, what you would need to actually pay has accelerated. And then during the downturn, there was the recognition maybe it's not such a bad idea to want to not be as leveraged in the purchase. So we're kind of going through a phase, but they're generally speaking, the desire to not have debt is still very, very important. And so your ability to help a person understand the potential loss opportunity by waiting too long becomes an important skill. While recognizing this, say, oh, don't worry about it, just don't put any money down and go for it. The reality is an understanding to help them understand what the benefits, the pros and cons of making a decision. There's an unwillingness to share personal financial information. Many individuals, especially those who are originally from another country, may be in countries where if one shares too much information about their finances, they're inviting authorities, regulators to come take some of it or to perhaps expose themselves to robbery. And so there's a tendency and hesitancy to let you have all the information about how much money they make and how much resources they have in a purchase. And so the methodology that I have used when you're working with a client who is not as comfortable in just saying, here's my bank statements, take a look at it, is to say that, okay, and to really help them understand how the purchase process works. And the first thing is to say that, okay, we found a house you like. This is a price you're comfortable paying. Will you be writing an all-cash offer or will you want to have a loan? If they say it's an all-cash offer, you just go, yeah! If they say they've given, okay, well, let me kind of go over the process. When we submit an application to a lender for a mortgage, one of the things they would like to confirm is that the money that you're using for your down payment, whatever that is, and you find out what that is, has been what is called seasoned. It means that it's been in a bank account in your name for a certain period of time. Do you have evidence of that? You walk them through the process. They would like to know that your history of making payments for obligations you've had. They'll do a credit check. And you go through all of that process, doing verifying employment and stuff. And I find that if you walk them through the process step by step and just ask them, do you have evidence that we can provide the lender? Then they become more comfortable in opening up the details of what they have. And I will also say that in many ways our industry has evolved. Let's just hand it off to a mortgage broker. But the reality is the more that a real estate agent understands when you're working with a client that really is not familiar with the home buying process and the mortgage process, I'm not suggesting anyone in the room become the primary mortgage person necessarily, but at least understanding that can be the interface to help the consumer feel comfortable. Aversion to debt, we've talked about that already. It's be cautious and conscious of not using complicated financial terminology. There's a strong belief that 20% down is still required. Some prefer to wait till 50. If they have 50% down or have parents or other families who help them, that can be an advantage regardless. Lack of stated mortgage income products. This is a slide that we put in to say that this is something that is challenging for the Asian American Pacific Islander consumer because so many of them own their own businesses. And if you're self-employed, that's what the original purpose of such mortgage products were. And so the lack of that has become somewhat of a challenge and a barrier to home ownership. So when you're working with clients, some of the do's and don'ts, I mean the do's, this is true for every real estate transaction. Listen to your customers, focus on long-term relationships. Be conscious of nonverbal communication because in a high context culture, not everybody is directed in saying something that oftentimes it will be the behavior, the nodding of the head. Sometimes nodding a head doesn't mean they're agreeing with you. It just might be trying to be polite. So be conscious of those things. Always demonstrate that you have their best interests in mind and really educate your clients about the process. And that, frankly, is what any good real estate professional does for every single client. don't make assumptions about ethnicity, language capabilities, income, national origin. You know, don't accidentally say, "Hi, it's nice to meet you. I love Korea," to find out the individual is actually from Laos. Because it's much as if somebody comes up to you and say that, "It's great to know you. I've never met somebody from Arizona," and somebody says, "No, man, I'm from Colorado." So there's a thing. Or even worse, you go up to somebody here and says, "Man, I know, you just love the San Francisco Giants?" And realize, I think Rocky's a little more important here. And what I'm saying, by that I mean, don't make assumptions. Use open-ended questions to probe for information that you can then use to craft your relationship. When you're working with clients from Asian countries of origin, yes is sometimes harder to determine. And somebody who just nods his head may be just acknowledging they've heard what you said, they may not necessarily in agreement. So probe 3 or 4 times to make sure that your understanding of their intentions is correct. Access to clients. Some of the things you can do are go to community events. It is very, very important that in many, many cities across the country, there will be certain, like say, Japanese festivals or Chinese New Year's festivals or Laotian community centers that have maybe a bingo or something that is very Western. But spend time and go there and meet friends, because that's where the business will come from. And what I've always found, and I think that many other agents within AREAA have confirmed, that you develop a relationship with an individual, because of the high context community, they will share your name with others, and one transaction will often lead to multiple transactions. But AREAA is another resource that one can use. It's an organization, I think, that has been mentioned that it's over 38 chapters right now, over 15,000 members. We have representation from over 40 different countries. We have strong connections, not just to the domestic Asian American Pacific Islander community in the United States, but really to their countries of origin, and have strong ties and support in helping reach consumers from outside of the country or coming into the United States to buy. Part of what AREAA does is really that we advocate for policies that will help increase homeownership among the Asian American Pacific Islander segment. And we know we do this by supporting our members in having thriving businesses in working with these communities. We are definitely not an association of Asian practitioners. We're an association of practitioners who are interested in including the Asian American Pacific Islander segment in their real estate businesses. Membership is inexpensive, a mere $99 a year. And I know that with new chapter forming, I suspect that the Greater Denver chapter will be developing opportunities to fast track growth in there, including access to the national conference. So to connect with AREAA, go to areaa.org, areaa.org, the convention. Hope and I will be here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you all very much.